All right. Hello and welcome to US History. With me, Professor Ferrero, we're going to be doing US History 1877 to the present. So, second part of US History. If you're taking a college course or if you're taking a high school course, this US History tends to be compartmentalized in these two chunks. Today, we're going to be talking about the first period in 1877 to the present, the Gilded Age. So, let's go ahead and get started with that. So, the Gilded Age is going to start off with the Second Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, both of them are going to be times of immense economic and technological progress. Lots of new technologies, lots of new money, lots of big business. You're going to see the birth of your first kind of super rich industrial titan types. Some people view them very, very negatively. That's why you see sometimes they are called robber barons. Furthermore, increasing the Gilded Age, increasing all the industrialization, is going to be the Transcontinental Railroad. It's going to be completed towards the end of the Civil War, which is going or in the Reconstruction period. It's going to connect the East Coast to the West Coast. This is a massive, massive deal as to ship things from New York to California. In the late 1800s, you'd have to go around the tip of South America, which is tens of thousands, or I think around 20,000 kilometers in distance. It is a massive, massive distance. So having a railroad connecting you from point A to point B to travel across the continent, that's going to make everything so much easier. It's going to allow people who have shops, maybe you produce furniture, maybe you produce cars, maybe you produce some other type of good. You're able to now sell it in markets across the country because the railroads are going to connect the United States in a way that they hadn't been before. The reason that this is called a Gilded Age or the Gilded Age is because many of you guys might know if something is gilded, that means that it's nice on the outside, but not necessarily nice on the inside. If you have a gold chain, but it's only a gold wrap, it's gold foil underneath, it might be tin, it might be aluminum, it might be some other type of crass metal. That's what Mark Twain is going to refer to this period as. He refers to it as gilded. This is where we get the nickname the Gilded Age from. Because on the outside, it looks nice, it looks fantastic. It looks really, really impressive. But underneath, there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of political malfeasance. There's a lot of the poor and immigrants are going to be taken advantage during this time. You have both the economic incentives working against the common man, and you also have political machines as well. It's not just economic corruption, it's not just big business, it's also politicians that you're going to see be extremely corrupt during this time. Ultimately, because of all of these issues, you're going to start to see the birth of labor unions, which continue to be a major force in the United States even today. So, here you can see, looking at this image, let me go ahead and go get the pointer. As you can see here, this is actually New York City. If you look in the back, you can see Central Park, and I want you to take a moment, maybe pause the video, and note what are some of the different things you see or maybe don't see in this picture. So go ahead, pause the video, encourage you to break it down. So, as you guys probably already noticed, there is absolutely no safety equipment here. These men aren't strapped in, nothing's holding them down, anything like that. On top of that, too, no hard hats, no type of netting. Ultimately, this is going to really embody a lot of the Gilded Age in terms of industry and in terms of progress. There's not many regulations protecting American workers from workplace accidents. As you can tell, one misstep and these guys are dead. You can see all of the economic change here. This is from Give Me Liberty by Eric Fauner. If you notice all of this data, you actually see an increase in agriculture, which is kind of interesting because if you look at the workforce, it moves from being predominantly agricultural to predominantly industrial. Trade services administration, those type of jobs are going to be white collar jobs. Think jobs that provide a service as opposed to produce either an agricultural good or a manufactured good. In terms of economic progress, the economy explodes. We go from a backwater country during this time frame, a country that's a third-rate power compared to Europe, to being really set up to be the economic juggernaut that we continue to be to this day. And even though a lot of people are going to die in workplace accidents, you see the life expectancies increasing as well. The Gilded Age is really complicated because while there's a lot of corruption, there's still also a lot of progress. And here you see the importance of the railway network. You can see how it's connecting New York all the way to Los Angeles. It's going to allow a national market for people here in the United States. So, some of those new technologies, you have a lot of new technologies such as the telephone, the phonogram. Phonograms are similar to records. You can think of them kind of like a candle, as opposed to a disc where it runs along um, the edge of the candle, and that's how it records sound. The light bulb, I'm sure many of you guys have been told, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. That's actually incorrect. Thomas Edison perfected the light bulb before they tended to burn out very, very quickly. But Thomas Edison's going to be the one to perfect it. You have the creation of the automobile, and move a little bit past the Industrial Revolution and the Gilded Age is when you start to kind of see the mass manufacturing of automobiles. But we'll get into that in a future lesson. Part of the reason you're able to see a lot fewer people in agriculture as well is because of this right here. You have new farming technologies such as the mechanical reaper and the steel plow. You have major inventors during this time period, such as Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison is a marketing and business genius compared to his contemporary Nikola Tesla, who is a lot more technologically and scientifically savvy. Nikola Tesla is by far the better inventor. Thomas Edison, he's going to go ahead and come up with direct current. Direct current is actually a very inefficient form of electricity. You would need power grids basically every few city blocks using direct current. Where alternating current is what Nikola Tesla is going to use. Alternating current is what all of your wall outlets in the house use. Nikola Tesla, brilliant, brilliant genius, but he's actually ultimately going to die poor due to the fact that he's so bad at business. He doesn't go ahead and patent a lot of his inventions, and because of that, he gets screwed over by a lot of people, including Thomas Edison. You also see the creation of the Bessemer process. This is a super duper important piece of technological advancement. The Bessemer process is what you see going on right here in this picture. It allows for cheaper, easier production of steel. You might be saying, why the heck does that matter? Well, that's why that matters. Railroads are made out of steel. On top of that, too, you're going to see the birth of the first skyscrapers. These things are going to be ridiculously expensive before the creation of the Bessemer process. Once the Bessemer process is perfected, steel is quicker to manufacture, cheaper to manufacture, and it can be produced on a mass scale. So ultimately, that's going to cause prices to fall and everything to go ahead and progress just really take off because these companies are able to make more money while selling their product for less. So, talking about sales and manufacturing, it's important to note these two key topics. So, you have horizontal integration and vertical integration. I want to take a moment to talk briefly about each. Both of these have to do with economics. Both of them are going to be perfected by different key individuals in the Gilded Age. Horizontal integration works by one company buying up all of the competition, one company in a given market. So, for example, Kroger's does not compete with Apple. Why does Kroger not compete with Apple? Because Kroger's a grocery store and Apple sells technology. They're in different markets. Apple's in the technology space, Kroger's in the grocery space. Tractor Supply does not compete with Abercrombie and Fitch because Tractor Supply offers farm goods and yard goods, where Abercrombie and Fitch offers textiles, it offers clothing. So let's take a given market, for example. The one that I'm using here is phones. Ultimately, phones, let's use a phone company everybody knows, Apple. If Apple were to go ahead and buy up LG, Samsung, Pixel, and Sony, this is horizontal integration. So when one company is buying up competitors within a given market, this can often lead to a monopoly or a trust, but it doesn't necessarily need to. We're going to talk about monopolies and trust a little later in the lecture. It's going to be pioneered by John D. Rockefeller. He's a massive industrialist in the late 1800s. Vertical integration works a little differently. So for vertical integration, we're going to focus on a product. We're going to focus, say, on a pencil. In order to make a pencil, you need tons of different components. You might need the wood. You might need the graphite. You need the lead, or not the lead, you need the metal. You need the rubber. You need the paint. And you need to bring all of these things together to make a single product. Ultimately, it's going to be a lot more expensive if you're going out paying other people to do those things. I'm going to go ahead and hire my buddy Fred to go ahead and get the wood. If I'm going to go ahead and hire my buddy Jesus to go ahead and get the graphite, it's ultimately going to cost a lot more than if I did it myself. If my company owns every step of the production process, it's going to drive prices down. So, vertical integration, you can see why it's vertical because it's up and down. So when one company owns each step of the production process for a product. So you might start off with the graphite mine to go ahead and get the pencil lead. Then go to a lumber yard to go ahead and get the wood for the pencil. Then go to a rubber mill to go ahead and get a goodness. So rubber for other things like that. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So rubber, and then going up to the factory. Here you can see vertical integration a little bit more cleanly. We don't necessarily need to look at that. So let's talk about our key players in the Industrial Revolution / Gilded Age. These men are going to be the economic driving forces. These are your Elon Musks, your Jeff Bezos. This is Bill Gates of the day. Starting all the way on the left is Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie's big industry is going to be he's going to be known for is steel. A little bit of fun fact for him: he actually himself was an immigrant to the United States. He grew up poor. He was a Scottish immigrant, and ultimately the Bessemer process, the railroads, all of those things, they're really going to rest on his back. John D. Rockefeller is going to be in the oil and kerosene industry. Before electric lights become popular, people are going to use kerosene to light their homes. So Rockefeller's company is literally going to be lighting the homes of basically every American in the United States. Rockefeller is going to be the richest man alive at the time. And if I'm not mistaken, if you scale his wealth up today, he would be the wealthiest man alive today, if you factor in for inflation. Jay Gould, he's going to be known for the railroad industry. He was very unpopular at the time. Carnegie and Rockefeller at least had their fans, but ultimately, um, Good himself's never going to be all that popular. And finally, J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan's in the banking sector. He's actually going to buy out Carnegie Steel at one point. So you might recognize his company. It's still around today. JP Morgan owns Chase Bank. So if you bank with Chase, you actually bank with a company that's owned by JP Morgan. So Titan Barons, or sorry, Titans of Industry Strat / robber barons. So it really depends on who you ask. Are these good people or are these bad people? Kind of similar to today. If you talk to certain people, you might have people who are huge fans of Bill Gates or Elon Musk or some other rich billionaire. On the other hand, you have other people who are very, very angry and frustrated at them. So, Titans of Industry. This is the positive term that was sometimes given to these men. It's due to the fact that these men are investing heavily in the cities. They're investing heavily in education. They're investing in infrastructure. They're building out roads. They're building out railroads. Ultimately, Rockefeller Square in New York City is going to be paid for by John D. Rockefeller. If you guys have ever seen a Christmas movie set in New York, it's that giant ice skating rink that's in Rockefeller Square. Ultimately, they're also going to push forward America's industrial power, which is going to help prep the United States to become the industrial powerhouse that it later would become, and eventually to be a superpower. These men have a massive, massive role to play in that. There's a big but, though, with that as well. Ultimately, they treat their factory employees absolutely horribly. There's no workers' compensation. If you are injured on the job, sucks. Nothing they are going to do for you. You lose your hand, more than likely you're going to go ahead and get fired because you can't do the job in the first place. No child labor laws and no normal labor laws. So you'll have kids as young as like 9, 10, 11, 12 working in these factories in very, very long hours. Many of them also work in coal mines as well. There's also no labor laws. So nowadays, if you work for more than 6 hours, you're required to get a break. I believe if you work more than eight, you're required to get a 30-minute break. Often these people are going to work 10 plus hours a day for very little pay. The working conditions are extremely dangerous, and workers are very easily and quickly replaced because during this time, a lot of immigrants are going to be moving into the United States, and they're really willing to take whatever job they can get. Between 1880 and 1900, America is going to have the most deaths due to factory and mine incidents in the entire industrial world. And you can see with political cartoons like this one, where you see Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was probably one of the worst offenders of being very two faced about this. You can literally see in this cartoon he's two faced. Carnegie over here is giving to his employees wage reductions. And over here on the right, he's giving out scholarships to Scotland. He's giving out libraries to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh being a city known for steel. It says his great double role. And again, in all of this, look at what he's standing on. He's standing on the money. He is in charge of the cash flow, whether it's to his employees or whether it's to improving the country and his home country of Scotland. So again, that kind of leaves us the question even today, are millionaires and billionaires, are they the bad guys or are they doing good stuff with their money? I'm not really here to answer that for you. Here we have tenement housing. This is where a lot of the employees of these factories would live, in particular, recent immigrants to the United States. If you ever get the opportunity to go to the Tenement Museum in New York City, it's very, very cool. It's very, very fascinating. Immigrant families are going to be moving into these small, I don't even know if you call them apartments, but tenement houses where basically you'd have maybe a bedroom or two, a kitchen, and a living room, very, very small spaces. There's stories. If you go to the Tenement Museum, I remember going with my wife one time. There was a family of, I think, five who all shared a twin bed to sleep in. This is where the immigrants are going to be living because they don't have any money to their name. You can look in this picture alone. You have like seven or eight different people in this room. On top of that, all of their pots and pans are there, all of their clothes are there. And if you notice, there's no ventilation. Depending on the building, oftentimes, the plumbing was non existent. You would have to go outside to shower or use an outhouse outside. So, again, tenement houses are going to be very, very terrible living situations for recent immigrants to the United States. During this time, most immigrants from the United States are going to be from Eastern and Southern Europe, or at least that's where most people are trying to come in from. You do have a lot of social issues as well with all of these immigrants coming in, as well as with the racial issues that the United States had historically with African Americans and other people of color. You have the rise of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is going to teach the belief that some races are on top of society because they're better, smarter, and stronger. That gets applied to the individual as well. That's why the argument that you'll get why are Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan also rich and wealthy? Simply because they're better. High rates of immigration from Eastern and Western Europe are going to lead to a lot of nativism. Nativism is basically leave America for white Protestant English speakers, essentially. Italians, Hungarians, and other Eastern and Southern Europeans, Greeks, Austrians, they're going to be viewed as inferior races to Anglo Saxons, those of British descent. Many of these immigrants, they're going to live in those tenement houses and they're going to work at these factory jobs. Most native born Americans don't want to take those jobs. Many are going to end up relying on the political corruption to take care of them, ironically enough. They realize that the system they're entering into is corrupt, but ultimately they get help where they can. You're also going to see the institution of immigration quotas as well, limiting the amount of immigrants per country. Western European countries, such as England and Scotland, France and Germany to a lesser extent, are going to be allowed more immigrants in, where Southern and Eastern Europeans are not. I like to jokingly refer to them whenever I'm teaching my classes in person to off whites, because while they are white by our standards today, they are viewed as inferior to those of Anglo Saxon stock, those of Anglo Saxon heritage. Ultimately, The idea of whiteness, even here in the United States, has expanded over time to include more and more groups. I would argue late 1800s to really the mid 1900s, Italians, Greeks, other Southern Europeans aren't really viewed as being white, at least not in the same way as Anglo Saxons or Germans or Scandinavian peoples. Jews are another great example of it. Jewish Americans aren't really viewed as being pejoratively white, and I'm talking about Ashkenazi Jews here, until the late 1900s. And even today, you'll hear individuals refer to other races, such as Asians, as white adjacent. So, again, the definition of what whiteness is, it kind of changes and is in flux over time. Racism is the thing that unfortunately plagues every people group throughout all of human history. You do have some attempts at reform, though. You have the gospel of wealth. Industrialists such as Andrew Carnegie are going to argue that it's the rich's duty to use their money to better society. He and other industrialists are going to invest very heavily in the cities. You also have the social gospel. The social gospel is a Protestant Christian movement that aims to further social justice and fighting poverty in the late 1800s. They're going to go into these cities and they're going to try and remedy a lot of the social ills while trying to convert people to Christianity. You also have labor unions rise. Workers are going to start banding together in collective bargaining. Hopefully, you know what that is. Collective bargaining, basically, if I walk out of my job and say I'm not working until you pay me more, I'm going to get fired. But if I and all of my coworkers, and maybe if it's a multi-chain restaurant or company or something like that, if the majority of the people are walking out and demand higher pay, they're more likely to comply because they can't fire all of you. If they do fire all of you, then they're going to be missing out on profit. So, collective bargaining, unions are going to offer a way for the common man to advocate for himself against these giant corporations. Monopolies and trusts. These things are also going to develop during this time. Many industrialists are going to try to form monopolies. However, they are legal and they do get broken up pretty quickly. A monopoly is when a single company has total control or near total control of a market. For example, if Apple was the only phone you could buy, they would have a monopoly. If Apple decided to raise your prices, you'd be screwed. You couldn't do anything about it. Ultimately, the US is going to break up monopolies such as Rockefeller, Standard Oil, into smaller companies. In order to get around that, these industrialists are going to come up with what's known as trusts. A trust is when an individual or board of individuals oversees the direction of a majority of companies within a market. So let's use a individual for example. I believe the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook. Tim Cook were in charge of Apple, but he's also in charge of Samsung, LG, Pixel, all of these other phone companies. He was in charge of all of them as the majority shareholder. Yes, you do have options. If you don't want to get an Apple, you can get a Pixel. If you don't want to get a Pixel, you can go ahead and get a Galaxy. But with that, if Tim Cook decides to raise all of the prices at the same time, he's able to do that. That's how a trust gets around a monopoly. You still have one guy or a group of guys in control of a given market. However, it gives the illusion of choice, and you still do technically have choice. Congress, though, is going to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act attempting to break up trusts because they end up being a major issue in the United States. And ultimately, a lot of presidents in the progressive era, after the Gilded Age, are going to use the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up these trusts. You can see in the political cartoon in the background, right over here. Which way am I pointing? That way. Right over here. You see these big millionaires. They're literally represented as sacks of money sitting behind politicians making choices. Basics saying who's behind all of this? The money is behind all of this. The big companies are behind all of this. And I'm going to end off talking about the political corruption of the Gilded Age. Political machines are small political groups, usually headed by one person or a small group, that essentially runs the major cities during the Gilded Age. They would usually shore up votes by offering connections to jobs for immigrants. So you come into the country as a recent immigrant, you might have a guy come up to you and say, I can get you housing, I can get you a job. You're going to say yes to that. You don't have any other option. And he's going to say, all that I ask of you is to support this politician whenever the election comes up. Immigrants are going to take that opportunity. They don't really have any options. Even if they are voting for somebody very, very corrupt, It's somebody very, very corrupt who's helping them when they don't really have any options. Ultimately, the main goal of political machines is really twofold: stay in power and make money. Now, they can't just siphon funds off of the taxpayer. That's illegal. And whenever you go ahead and check the balances, it's going to be very, very clear that, oh, you just paid yourself $1 million of taxpayer money. That's fraud. You're going to go to jail for that. They get around this though in a really, really smart way. They go ahead and they overpay construction companies. So, say I'm the mayor of a town. The construction company tells me that in order to build this park, it's $1 million. That's a conversation between me and the construction company. I then go ahead and tell the taxpayers it's $2 million. $2 million goes to the project. I intentionally overpaid the construction company. I pay them the $2 million. So whenever you look at the bank account from the city to the construction company, all 2 million is going to the construction company. However, since I made a deal with the construction company, they're going to kick back $500,000 to me. They're going to go ahead and they are going to give me $500,000. They keep the other $500,000. Everybody's happy. And the taxpayer is none the wiser. Essentially, they're going to embezzle taxpayers out of funds. The largest is going to be Tammany Hall in New York City. I'm going to encourage you guys, if you are in any of my in person classes, go ahead and write down any questions that you had about this lecture. Go ahead and note anything that you don't want further clarity on, things like that. And just go ahead and be ready for the next class for us to talk about this. If you are in just watching this online for fun, feel free to leave a comment with a question. I'll go ahead and I'll try to look through these and answer any questions that you might have. Take care, and Professor Ferrero out.